Okay, I think we're good to go. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Dr. Mary. I love it. Our guest is with us. We're always delighted when Thursdays come around. This is Carl Atiya Swanson, a good friend of mine. Well, that's probably a little overstatement, Carl. We're not that good of friends.
I mean,
only because we don't live by each other.
We don't live by each other. We don't get to like run into each other at a grocery store or do that kind of stuff.
Right.
But yeah.
But yeah, so Carl works in the arts in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and I work in the arts in Fargo-Moorhead. And so that's how we first intersected. But you and Maz, even though you just met about 45 seconds ago, have this other deeper connection, which, well, actually, I'm just going to second guess everything I say today. I'm not positive it's a deeper connection because the arts are a pretty deep connection.
I know. Yeah, don't undersell the arts here, Danny. Don't undersell the arts.
Especially you of all people.
Yeah, that's true. You and I, kind of our job to make sure that people understand they are very valuable. But you have this addiction and, more importantly, recovering from addiction shared stories. So Carl, we'll start sort of with the question we always ask, which is just tell us the piece of your story that you want to tell that led to the day that you decided it's time to make a change.
Yeah, I mean, where to begin with that story? You know, it's funny that we're doing this like right before Christmas time, because it was around Christmas time that you know, the shit hit the fan for me in my life. I had lost the job by not showing up because I was too drunk and too depressed to show up for a couple days, and so I was out of work and living sort of dissolutely in Minneapolis, and had gone to Chicago to be with my folks where to celebrate Christmas, and just met up with some friends for some drinks, and then that turned into more drinks by myself, and that turned into more drinks by myself, which turned into 1, 2 in the morning trying to get into my parents' apartment building in the middle of a negative 30-degree freezing wind night, and not being able to work the keys and ringing the bells, and my father eventually coming out to find me down there, my parents finding me in the middle of like the freezing cold, and me waking up the next day with zero recollection of that happening, but feeling like hell, and then everybody crying. What it was.
Merry Christmas.
Yeah, Merry Christmas, everybody. The year that Carl ruined Christmas, which then worked out for the best.
Yeah, actually, it might be the year that Christmas saved Carl.
I mean, we're in my family, we're really lucky to have folks who are pastors and counselors and who are nurses. And basically they all kicked into triage gear, and they're like, you're getting your butt into some rehab. And I, at that point, was like, yeah, I don't know what else I'm going to do with my life right now. So yeah, let's do that. And I'm really grateful that I was living in Minnesota when Minnesota has this Rule 25 where no one can be turned away for chemical dependency assistance. And so I got a Rule 25 assessment. And for the whole time, for the first part of it, into January, before I got into a treatment facility, I was telling myself that, I was just doing this because other people were asking me to, and like I didn't know what I was doing, and it wasn't a really big deal, and and then I got into this outpatient facility, and I was there with folks who were 10, 15, 20, 30 years older than me, who were there by court order, and that in and of itself was a system shock. And then to go through use histories and things like that, and have old timers nodding off, look at me and tell me, that's a lot of shit you've done. I was like, oh okay, then maybe I should actually do this for myself, and not just treat it like some sort of experiment. And so I left that facility February 7th, 2008. So that's what I count as my date right there. So 13 years in 2021 if I don't fuck it up before then.
You were young, Carl.
Yeah. As a little baby with a lot of shit crammed in there.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's a perfect example of it's not about, it doesn't have to be a lifetime of abuse to yourself for it to really stack up and start to matter.
Yeah, absolutely. And in you know, the further I've gotten from it too, the more, you know, the sort of two sides of the best and worst parts of me are in there as well, because a lot of it was also because I wanted to be around people and I wanted to be adventurous and I wanted to try things and I want to be creative, and I was doing that both naively and then dependently through drugs and alcohol. And you know, those are also really great qualities, to be curious and open and trying new things, um, except when you can't handle it, except when you're just thinking that you're swimming but you're actually drowning.
Yeah.
And so I'm just grateful for people who pointed out that I was actually drowning, and to myself for finding some little toehold on the shore and pull myself up over there, and to the state of Minnesota and to public health policy that let me go and get into rehab. I mean, that's a real thing too, is that I, you know, I got to be better because of public health policy, and because I'm a white guy who is not over policed, and because when people did stop me, it was generally college rent-a-cops and not actual officers who could do something. And I had family and education and a place to go back to where I didn't have to, you know, work in bars or sell or do anything else. Like those are big reasons why I get to be here today, and that's not a privilege that I take lightly.
Yeah, I think it's
Wow.
a really
Yeah.
important point, is that this journey is not so easy or accessible for all kinds of people, through lots and lots of reasons, some of them racial and some of them equity and some of them economics and some of them access just because of where you live, if you're rural versus urban and all of that. And it's such a it's such an incredible thing that we would make it difficult for someone either who's choosing for themselves to get help or who has been sort of coerced or mandated to get help. Why would we make that difficult?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
already difficult.
It's already hard enough. It's already
Yeah.
so hard. One of the other big ironies that I reflect on a lot is that so all this happened before the passage of the Affordable Care Act, right? And so when I tried to get insurance, because I wasn't employed that had insurance, the fact that I had gone to rehab was a pre-existing condition where they now like, you're too much of a liability, because I'd gone and sought help. Versus if I just stayed an active drunk, they would have insured me no problem.
And spend all that money on your time in the ER.
Yeah,
and,
exactly.
You know, I mean,
And
all
like
of
picking
that.
myself up there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's just make life easier for people. That's the bottom line for all of that.
It is kind of the bottom line.
Yeah.
Yes. So I'm, let's see, I got to think, I lost my train of thought. You said something that triggered a question for me. Do you have anything you want to say while I'm racking my brain? It was such a great question.
So what did you find hard? Shh, Lilby. What did you find hardest about your first few days in rehab?
Yeah. There's a couple things that were really hard for me about rehab. One was like just the first realization that I was actually there for a reason, right?
Yeah.
Like I spent the first part of it being like, really, I had a roommate who still very much an active user. And I like told him like, you know, I'm just doing this to check it out and as an experiment. Like, and I really did try and convince myself of that for the first while. But then like as a theater person, like and as a writer, like hearing people's stories and taking those in, and part of the work of being an artist is being moved by the way that people talk about their lives. And so, you know, sitting in those circles and, you know, having some actual real frank conversations, that there was, I don't know that there was a moment in my memory I sort of constructed like this. There was just a switch that slowly, like a dimmer switch, was like, oh, wait a minute, I'm here for a reason. And that turned up. And then another one was, I come from a long line of Lutheran pastors, and I decided at a young age that I was not a institutional religion person. Like there are too many ways to be in the world. secular humanist. And so what also really problematic was God talk in the AA sense. And I was being a brat about that. And the counselor basically said, don't bring your problems with God into my recovery. And I was like, oh,
Back
okay.
down.
Yeah, I know, it really was. It was like a boom. I was like, oh, that's what I'm doing here. And it's getting in the way of the other things that I need to do to be better. Yeah, so that like, I don't know if that was a lightning bolt, more like a lightning thud over the head from Zeus, but yeah. Those two things were hard. Were hard, and then good hard realizations.
So all of that prompted my question. Because we have not talked to any other artists, Carl. So, you know, as an artist who doesn't have addiction issues, so maybe I am an artist, maybe I'm not. I mean, you don't have to have addiction issues to be an artist, but you know, I think there is, I mean, when I listened to you talk about that you were curious and that you wanted to try things and that you wanted to be with people and all of that, I have some of those qualities, but not, I think my fear of trying to be good always outweighed like, oh, I should try that. Plus, I also like to be in control all the time. And so at no point did I want to be out of control.
Another artist trait right there.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So I'm curious to be a broad stroke conversation. Do you think that the way that we undervalue artists and the kind of inherent qualities that we tend to have, not exclusive to artists, but we sort of have this sort of foundational bag of tricks in us. Do you think that the way that we undervalue those bags of tricks and we sort of treat artists as an other lends itself then to feeling like, what the hell? Like nobody's got any expectations on me anyway. Let's try it.
Yes and no, because I feel like people do have expectations. And I think part of the cultural expectations of artists is that there is some sort of like grand suffering and struggle. Like we have this huge mythology around tortured artists and starving artists and people suffering for their art.
Well, and never selling out.
And never selling out. And like, yeah. I mean, you know, you think about how many musicians have we idolized and put up on pedestals who have enormous drug and alcohol issues. And we take that as part and parcel of it and make it part of their artistry as opposed to a suffering of their humanity.
Right.
You know, like as a young person, reading Jack Kerouac, like that, like is enormously inspirational to me. But what I didn't realize then, I thought that the drinking made Kerouac, not that the drinking killed Kerouac.
Right.
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 And these like mythologies around suffering and torture, these are, I think, you know, in tandem with the sense of freedom and like the desire to break away from social norms and to be rebellious and to question and to make people uncomfortable. These two things come together in a really toxic cocktail, and it's really destructive to the way that we think about ourselves as artists, where we have to be suffering or we have to be in pain in order to create something great. One of the things that I like, you know, I have a million little mantras and a million, you know, song lyrics and poem quotes and things in my head that I just go back to all the time. But there's no inherent virtue in suffering. Right. And if we can get through that and think about really like the Buddhist concept of like our purpose here is to reduce the suffering of others, and to think about that and think about like that as a way that we are creative and a way that we make art, then that is also inherently starts with us and the way that we are in our work and in our lives.
So how did your art change when you got sober?
This is joking, but also serious. I stopped writing poems when I got sober because I feel like I remembered how to write whole sentences. And yeah, and I stopped writing poems for a long time, both like because I was doing other stuff and because I, you know, internalized some bad advice from which people then had come back to that in the last like 3 years. But I'll say this too, is that I've never been particularly an AA guy, going back to, you know, all the other things about religion, blah, 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 blah. But art and theater specifically really did save me in a lot of ways. Being, you know, I mean, AA is about sitting in rooms and sitting in circles and talking and connecting to people. And that was what theater did for me. It's a space to make and create and imagine other worlds and imagine what else is possible.
That's really interesting.
I mean, if you're coming out of recovery, if you're coming into recovery, a whole part of that work is reimagining who you are now that you're not who you thought you were. And to make theater with other people is an active practice of that. And so, like, I have enormous gratitude to Lamb with Lion and Umbrella Collective and the people who really like took me in and gave me a home and a place to be and create for a long time. And I mean, I'm really grateful that I got to be in this community in the Twin Cities at the time when I was getting sober too. You know, I sort of showed up and spent a year and a half, 2 years here as a pretty active drunk and got to make a bunch of things, but also messed up a bunch of stuff. But then got to turn around and figure out, like, how can I be useful in this community, and how can I write about it, and how can I help, and how can I connect, and them professionally and personally. That's been like the thread of my life for the last decade and a half, almost. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I think it's really interesting what you just said about how the creative part of being in a theater group helped you the same way going to an AA meeting would. Did you try any AA meetings and realize it just wasn't for you?
Yeah, I mean, I got out of the rehab center and went and yeah, I you know, tried to go to meetings, and it's fine. It's like going to church for me. Like, I know how to sit in groups, and I know how to go through, you know, I know the catechism and the dogma of it, right? And I really appreciate it, and I appreciate that it works for people. It's the same reason that I'm not opposed to institutional religion, but it's just like, it's not how I exist in the world, how I want to interact with the world. So yeah, so I go every once in a while in the same way that I go back to church, because there is a comfort there and there's a solace in a group of people who are doing a thing together. And I want to support people, you know, coming who need help. Like, that is definitely a place I tell people, like, go check out meetings and try a bunch of them, see if there's one that fits for you.
No, it's just really interesting that you say that, because a lot of people I've met since I've been sober, their stumbling block with AA is the fact that, you know, the first edition came out in 1938 by two religious white Christian men.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of Christianity in that book. And then you meet, you know, I've met Muslims and people who just aren't
Native Americans
and people just
atheists,
who are basically atheists. And that's where they struggle.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's why you see there are Buddhist groups and groups that are sort of, how do you create a syncretic AA, one that incorporates the beliefs that you have with this, like, AA structure. I mean, and to be perfectly honest, like, the AA structure is pretty open source. Like, you can take it and you can adapt it in a whole bunch of different ways. I think
it's very malleable.
It's very malleable. I mean, what's important about it is that it brings people together. Like, that's fundamentally it, is like, it brings people together, and it gives, like the Book of Common Prayer, it gives people some shared language to really start from. And if you disagree with that, like, to then disagree with it and build from that. So, I think that there's infinite possibilities, but what's important in a recovery journey is finding groups of people who will support you in that. And I got that through arts, and I got that through theater, and I got that through family and through making things.
Well, that's really
It's so
interesting. I've never met anyone that did that before. I mean, there are hundreds of different groups, AA groups, even in Fargo Moorhead. Mm-hmm. Some are really religious, some are not religious at all. So you've got to find the right one. But I've never met anyone from your religious background and creative background before that. And that was just really interesting to listen to you say all that.
Well, what's fascinating to me is when Maz was in inpatient rehab for 4.5 weeks. And when I could go visit him, he would say to me, "Oh, we have to go to the really religious AA tonight." I mean, it just did not resonate for him at all. And so because he also grew up in a Christian household. I mean, he understood it. He could play the part. It just didn't resonate.
No.
And it's funny, I went to 2 Al-Anon meetings since we've been doing this, because I felt like, oh, there's probably some value there. And I, of the 2 of us, am by far the much more traditional church-going person until very recently in my life. And it just shut me right down. I mean, I just thought, I'm not here to chant stuff that doesn't really resonate for me. So I love your idea, because you're absolutely right, Carl. What comes of art making in community is community. And bettering yourself and sharing and learning and evolving. And I've never, ever thought about it that way.
I mean, that is the other part of AA is making a community, but to actually do it that way too, it's just really interesting to hear about, because it's all the right stuff, just done slightly differently. Yeah.
There's a Bright Eyes lyric that I come back to a lot, which is there are hundreds of ways to get through the day. You better just find one. And so like that's the thing. Just find one.
Yep. Find the one that works for you. Stop judging it if it doesn't work for others.
Yeah, I mean that's a lot of, there's a lot of antagonistic energy in that you can spend in other places building stuff.
Yes, absolutely. Well, Carl, this has been a really lovely conversation. Nice to connect with you.
Oh, it was fantastic to meet you.
In this way,
nice to
I
meet you
knew
too,
that Dad would be happy to meet you.
Yeah. Well,
So thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
And gosh, happy end of 2020.
We may.
Well, you keep saying that. There's we still have
nothing could go wrong now.
Knock on all the wood you can get your hands
around you.
Yeah, take care, and we'll talk soon. Thanks so much, Carl.
See you later, y'all.
Great day.
Everybody else, we'll see you tomorrow.
Bye.
Bye.